name's Molly Heath. I'm a science teacher at Burlington High School. This year in my chemistry classes, I implemented a proficiency-based learning system for the fourth quarter. This video is going to tell you a little bit about what I did, how I did it, and how it all went. I started this process with research. I read a series of articles from the journal Educational Leadership about grading and how we can improve student learning through the way we grade. To help me develop a system to use in my own classroom for proficiency-based learning, I read this blog post by Amy Dixon, who's a fellow with Partnership for Change. It detailed a system she'd seen put in use in other science classrooms and was really helpful in figuring out how I was going to accomplish my goals. One of my first tasks was to begin writing proficiencies. I had to decide what did I want students to know and be able to do. I tried to write these in really student-friendly language so they could clearly understand what it was that they were trying to achieve. I wrote some proficiencies that were required, all students would need to show that they mastered them, and some that were extension. These were things that I would really love students to be able to know, but I decided weren't absolutely necessary. I posted these proficiencies on the wall of the classroom so students could always look around and know what it was that they were trying to learn. This flowchart shows the cycle of learning in my classroom. We started with a pre-assessment to see what students knew ahead of time about each proficiency. From there, we moved on to instruction and practice of those proficiencies. That part looked pretty much like a normal classroom. What you would do every day, that's what I did. I didn't change much about that piece of my teaching. After that, students took a proficiency quiz. If they scored less than 90%, they had to repeat that cycle and go back to more instruction and practice. If they scored more than 90%, they passed that proficiency, and they could move on to working on an extension, they could tutor other students, they could help find resources. So there were lots of options for students when they already had passed a proficiency. From there, we would repeat that cycle for each proficiency. At the end of a unit, we had a unit test to show long-term retention. Here's one example of a pre-assessment. Notice it gives the proficiency at the top and has clear questions to assess that proficiency. One way students kept track of their progress was with this tracking sheet. When they got back a pre-assessment, they'd record their score. Then they'd write down what practice they completed as we did more instruction, and then when they took a quiz, they'd record their quiz score. If that score wasn't a 90% or above, which was our cutoff for being proficient, then they did more practice and took a retake and recorded what score they got on that. You'll notice they could also record tutoring and extension proficiencies, which if they did these activities, I gave them some extra credit for. To help students be able to work more independently and at their own pace, I created a website of resources. On this website, there were links to pages showing our different proficiencies, so students could again go and look at, okay, what is it that I'm working on? If I need to work on 7b, what does that mean? Oh, I understand how and why covalent bonds form. From there, they could click on that and get to a page with a whole series of resources, with video links, with what textbook pages to look at, with practice sheets, so that they could then practice independently what they needed to work on. In the classroom, I quickly discovered the importance of the answer key. Making sure that there was an answer key for things that students were working on was really helpful. That way, they didn't always have to come to me to check in how they were doing. They could become more independent and really assess their own learning. Once students felt ready, they took a quiz on the proficiency they were working on. This quiz was very much like the pre-assessment in terms of what types of questions it had, so they really did know what they were preparing for. Students took this when they felt ready, so that meant not everyone is taking the same quiz the same day. This allowed students to progress more at their own pace, which I think a lot of them really enjoyed. This did require me to be pretty organized. I had to develop a system for how I was going to keep track of where all those different quizzes and versions of quizzes were, so that if a student came up to me and said, I'd like to do a 7b retake, I could quickly give them one. Once students passed a proficiency, that meant a score of 90% or above on the quiz, they put a sticker on the wall chart for that proficiency. This allowed them and me to really clearly see what they had accomplished and what they still needed to work on. Plus, I think lots of students really enjoyed that satisfaction of putting up a sticker when they finally accomplished a proficiency, especially if it was one they were struggling with. Every couple weeks, we would look at some data to see how we were doing with the goal of having all students meet all proficiency. We also used this time to recognize people who had big improvements. That way, students who were still struggling to meet a proficiency but had improved significantly got recognition for all that hard work they did, even if they weren't yet able to mark off that proficiency as complete. So, what happened when I switched to proficiency-based learning? Well, you can see here my average test scores for both my Blue 1 and Blue 2 classes. In green, you can see the average score between the two classes. Though I don't have large enough groups of students to make a truly statistically significant sample, I still think these results are pretty impressive. Notice that for our proficiency-based unit, that's the last set of bars, test 7, the average test score was a full 10 points higher than any previous average. Notice as well that both the Blue 1 and Blue 2 classes scored about equally well, which wasn't always true in previous tests. I also found it interesting to look at some individual student data. I thought that our proficiency-based system really was very helpful for English language learners as well as struggling learners. This first graph shows the results from a student who is an English language learner, and notice that the proficiency-based test score was a 93, which was 11 points higher than any previous test score the student had. Here are the results from another student who's an English language learner. Notice this student didn't pass many tests during the school year. However, on our proficiency-based unit test, the student got an 88. This final graph shows a student who struggled in chemistry, though the student wasn't an English language learner. On our test for the proficiency-based unit, however, the student got a 99%.
So what did I learn through this process? Well, first of all, I learned the value of rapid feedback. I think one of the things that was so successful about this whole system was the idea that students quickly got to find out what they knew and what they didn't know, and got some really rapid feedback to make changes to their learning while they were still learning. It also took a lot of stress off of students. You could see this visible relief when they asked me, well, what happens if I don't pass this test? And my answer was, well, you keep working and you try again. When students talked to me about what they thought about the proficiency-based system, they had interesting things to say. Not everyone loved it, first of all. It's not perfect. Not every student is going to be completely won over by this system. However, they did really start to incorporate that idea of individual responsibility. Some students said things like, it takes longer, but it really makes you learn it. Or, you really have to keep working and be accountable for it, which is exactly what I want my students to do. I also found out they really love stickers. It was highly motivating to be able to put the sticker on the wall. They also started to really just take off and learn at their own pace. Some students who really resisted learning became my most avid learners and were asking me, can I just take this quiz? I'm ready to keep going. And that was really an exciting transformation. As time went on, I also saw them start to help each other a little more and tutor each other and take advantage of that idea that when you explain something to someone else, you learn it better. But don't take my word for it. Students really are the ones who can tell you what it was like for them. So let's let them have the last word.
So tell me what you think about the proficiency-based learning we're doing in chemistry right now.
It's awesome. Brought my grade up 35 points from an A to an A+ now.
Nice. I like it because the whole learning thing is I'm not confused about what we're learning. I know exactly what we're learning each day, and it gives me a chance to learn it and actually feel good and confident that I can actually pass it. Since I took proficiency, then I corrected the proficiency, then I took the quiz, and then I got 100 on it.
Wow, I feel that we cover the material a little more in depth, and we go through it till we understand it fully. Then once we pass that, we just move on. But we still since they kind of move on to the next one, everything kind of entwines with everything. So you learn and you can retain that knowledge a little bit better.
It lets you go at your own pace.
Yeah, and also you have a good set of notes because they're like specific pages, and you have the quizzes too.
Good. And what do you think about how we keep track of whether you're proficient or not?
I think it's good and good because I can see how bad I did the first time, then I can feel good about myself the second time because like, oh, I got 100 instead of a 40.
Great.
Read and simple.
Yeah. Great. What do you like about the wall chart?
Striving for stickers.
Sparkly.
So, tell me about what you think about proficiency-based learning in chemistry.
I think it's actually really efficient because you would have to keep working on the proficiency to be able to get a 90 or higher. So by the time you pass it, it's like you move on to the next one. But if you don't pass it, then you keep working on it until you are proficient at it.
Great.
And I think it's helpful because it improved my grade, and yeah, I think it's working out for me.
I think that it's helping me out a lot, and I think it's helping other students a lot too, because I see all the stickers on the boards that we're using to like measure how many people are successful, and it's full, and no one's falling behind, which is great because I usually do.
Great.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's working for me.